A Spartan just crashed on Earth. Not the Earth anyone remembers. Not the Earth of cities and governments and the sprawling industrial civilization that built the UNSC and launched humanity into the stars. That Earth is 1,000 years gone, scrubbed clean by a plague that killed every living thing on the planet's surface and left nothing behind but silence and the slow, patient work of machines designed to start over. This Earth belongs to the machines now, and the tribes that live in their shadow, and one woman with a handmade bow, a stolen piece of ancient technology wired over her left eye, and more knowledge about what this world actually is than any other human being alive. Her name is Aloy. She was 3 hours into a scouting run in the Gaia borderlands when the sky caught fire. She looked up, and something the size of a mountain came through the clouds. What if the most dangerous soldier in the Halo galaxy crash-landed on humanity's lost homeworld? A future Earth ruled by machines, rebuilt from extinction, and about to be invaded by the most fanatical religious army in the known universe. What if the Covenant looked down at this world's ancient terraforming facilities and decided, with total, unshakable conviction, that they had just found the most sacred Forerunner site in existence? And what if the only people standing between a galaxy-spanning alien armada and the complete destruction of a reborn Earth were a lone hunter who talks to machines, and the last Spartan standing? This is that story. Subscribe now and drop in the comments the name of any universe you want to see collide next. The best suggestions become the next episode. May the Force be with you. Now, let's get into it. The UNSC reconnaissance vessel, Cartographer's Wake, had not been built to survive what was happening to it. It had been built for deep space cartography. A survey ship, fast and lightly armored, designed to map the edges of explored space and return home with data rather than glory. It carried a crew of 41. It carried one Spartan asset in emergency cryosuspension, attached to the mission by UNSC Command for reasons described in the official orders as precautionary, and which now, with a Covenant plasma torpedo lodged in the port engine housing and the Shaw Fujikawa slip space drive spinning up under damage conditions that the chief engineer had classified as catastrophically inadvisable, seemed considerably more prescient than precautionary. "Drive is ready," Lieutenant Commander Torres called from engineering, her voice carrying the specific flatness of someone delivering information they would personally prefer not to be delivering. "I can't guarantee where we come out, or when." "Can you guarantee we come out at all?" Captain Reyes said. A pause. 60-40. "Take it," Reyes said. The Cartographer's Wake jumped. Slip space transit lasted 11 seconds. Under optimal conditions, those 11 seconds were disorienting and mildly unpleasant. A sensation of pressure and wrongness that experienced crew learned to breathe through and new crew learned to endure. Under these conditions, a damaged drive, emergency calculations run in 40 seconds instead of 4 hours, a ship already bleeding heat and atmosphere into the transit tunnel. Those 11 seconds were something close to catastrophic. Gravity abandoned its post. 3 crew members lost consciousness. Torres bit through her lower lip and didn't notice until they were through. They came through. "Navigation," Reyes said, pulling herself upright in her command chair, tasting blood. "Where are we?" Ensign Park was already running the star charts, already running them a second time. His face had the expression of a young man whose instruments were telling him something his training had not covered and who was hoping very much that the third look would give him a different answer. It didn't. "Captain," he said carefully, "the continental configuration on the planet ahead. It matches pre-Covenant war cartographic records for Earth at 99.7% accuracy." The bridge went quiet. "That's impossible," said someone. No one looked to see who. "Felix," Reyes said, addressing the ship's AI. "Confirm." "Confirmed," Felix said. "We are in orbit above Earth. However, no electronic signals detected, no radio, no navigational beacons, no orbital infrastructure. Atmospheric composition shows high oxygen content and elevated biological activity consistent with dense surface vegetation." A pause that, from an AI, meant something. "Captain, the surface is covered in jungle, and there are energy signatures rising from multiple underground locations that I cannot immediately classify. Earth, 1,000 years in the future, wild, alive, and broadcasting something from underground that Felix couldn't explain." Reyes had 3 seconds to process this before the second Covenant plasma torpedo, the one that had followed them through the slipspace jump like a bad decision following its maker, connected with the cartographer's wake's remaining engine housing. The last thing she did before the impact sequence began was seal the cryopod. The pod ejected. The cartographer's wake went the rest of the way down alone, a burning mountain crossing the Karja sky at dawn, trailing plasma and atmosphere, and the specific violent spectacle of a military vessel meeting a planet it was not prepared for. The tribes below watched it come. The machines below scattered. The ground shook when it hit. The sound rolled across the sundom like a second sky breaking. And in the cold dark above the atmosphere, 11 minutes later, a Covenant long-range sensor array completed its passive sweep of the planet's surface and found, rising from deep underground, energy signatures that made its instruments sing with a recognition so strong it bordered on reverence. The Prophet Commander received the report in his command throne and read it once. He transmitted one word back to the fleet: sacred. 3 assault carriers changed course. Aloy reached the crash site 40 minutes after impact, running the whole way. She was a hunter, had been trained as one from childhood by a foster father who had understood, without being able to fully articulate why, that the girl he was raising was going to need every skill she could accumulate before the world showed her what it had in store. She ran toward things other people ran from. She always had. It was not recklessness. It was the specific, reasoned conviction that the only way to understand something dangerous was to get close enough to see it clearly. The debris field began 3 kilometers from the main impact point. She moved through it, reading every piece. Hull plating in a material her focus had no record of, military grade and built for punishment. Weapons half buried in the soil, projectile-based and sized for hands larger than hers. Cabling that sparked with residual current at voltages that would have powered a cauldron sublevel. Her focus cross-referenced everything against every database she had access to and returned the same answer each time. Pre-zero-day military construction. Manufacturing origin, unknown. Estimated age, inconsistent with all known records. These things had not been made on this Earth. She found 3 people in gray military uniforms in the first 100 meters of the trench. She checked for life signs. Nothing. She kept moving. At the western edge of the debris field, she found 4 more, alive, armed, moving through the wreckage with the methodical precision of soldiers running a search pattern. They hadn't seen her yet. She watched them for 30 seconds from the shadow of a collapsed hull section. Human. Obviously human. But their equipment pointed in a direction that nothing currently on this Earth had ever pointed. She was still building her assessment when she found the cryopod, 20 meters north of the main trench. The outer casing was cracked from landing, but the interior containment held. Her focus returned one biosign, slow, stable, the suppressed metabolic rhythm of someone in suspended preservation. She crouched beside it, reached for her kit, started assessing the release mechanism. The pod opened itself. What stepped out stopped her focus cold. 2 meters tall, powered armor from head to foot, full integration, no exposed joints, the visor opaque and completely unreadable. Her focus ran its scan and returned nothing. Not a partial match. Not a structural analogy. A clean white wall where information should have been. She had accessed Cauldron blueprints, Gaia archives, old-world military databases stretching back 1,000 years. She had never encountered a blank like this. He came out of the pod fast. Combat fast. Weapon up before his eyes had adjusted. Threat assessment running before he had finished standing. He scanned the crash site in a single sweep. Found the 4 soldiers at the western perimeter. Found the fallen ship. Found the smoke. Found her. His weapon came up and locked. She was already moving. Not away, through, using the momentum of his targeting shift against him, putting hull debris between herself and his sightline in the same motion that brought her spear to horizontal. 6 feet of distance. A standoff that had assembled itself in under 2 seconds. "I'm not your enemy," she said. Her voice was even. She had learned a long time ago that the most useful thing you could do when someone pointed a weapon at you was sound like you had expected it. "The device on your face," he said. Flat. No inflection. The voice of someone who processed information and acted on it without the social friction that normal humans brought to hostile encounters. "It's scanning the machines." "It's always scanning. It's passive. I can't turn it off." She held her position, held his visor the way she would have held a pair of eyes. "In my experience, assuming you understand something because it looks like something you've seen before gets people killed. We're both doing that right now." A pause. "Let's stop." He was silent for a moment. Then his armor's sensors fired. "Incoming," he said. 3 directions. Large. Her focus had already seen it. The convergence signatures building from north, east, and west. The patrol patterns of a dozen machines collapsing into a single unified approach vector centered on the impact site. And from the north, a thermal signature that she recognized before it broke the tree line and felt the cold drop in her stomach that it always produced. She knew that profile. She had fought it twice before. Both times, it had nearly killed her. The Thunderjaw came through the trees at full combat charge. 4 meters of biomechanical apex predator. Disc launchers on both shoulders tracking independently. Plasma cannon charging in its jaw with the high whine that meant 3 seconds to firing. It cleared the tree line and ran a threat assessment on everything in the impact site simultaneously. Its combat programming translated the result into one directive: destroy. It opened with the disc launchers. The first salvo tore through the hull debris to Aloy's left. She was already rolling right, coming up in a sprint, splitting the targeting geometry. Behind her, she heard the Spartan's weapon open up. A sound she had never heard before. Deep and sustained and brutally authoritative, the voice of a weapon built specifically to hurt things that were very difficult to hurt. The Thunderjaw's left disc launcher detonated. It turned toward him. She hit the right launcher, housing with 3 arrows. Focus-guided, precision-placed, each one finding the specific joint she was targeting with the accuracy that came from years of treating machine anatomy as a second language. The launcher seized. The Thunderjaw turned back toward her, and he put 2 rounds directly into its left optical sensor cluster, and 200 tons of war machine staggered like something had kicked it in the skull. She vaulted onto its flank, drove an override spike into the reactor housing, not to control it, not to turn it, but to trigger a targeted power surge in the plasma cannon's charge cycle. The cannon backfired. The resulting detonation blew the Thunderjaw's dorsal plating 20 meters and dropped the machine into the impact trench in a collapse that shook the ground for 100 meters in every direction. Then silence. The 4 UNSC soldiers at the western perimeter had not moved during the fight. They were staring at the fallen Thunderjaw, then at Aloy, then at the armored soldier who had walked out of a cryopod and immediately started pulling the fight in the right direction. He was looking at the Thunderjaw, studying it, cataloging it, the specific professional attention of a soldier who had just encountered an unknown weapon system and was already building a response protocol. "There are more of those," he said. Not a question. "Many more," she said. "Different types, some bigger." He absorbed this without visible reaction. Then he looked at her, at the spear, the focus, the armor that was handmade and battle-worn and assembled from materials salvaged from machines she had hunted and taken apart herself. He looked at the override spike still in her hand. He looked at the fallen Thunderjaw. He ran some calculation she couldn't see. "You know how they work," he said. "Better than anyone alive," she said. "Then you need to show me." He turned toward the crash site, toward the 4 survivors, the burning wreckage, the smoke rising into a sky that was already showing the first hints of something moving at the edge of orbital range, something his sensors had just detected, something large. "Because we have a bigger problem coming." She followed his gaze upward. Her focus reached toward the orbital signatures he had detected, pushed its range to the absolute limit, pulled back readings that it processed for 3 seconds before returning a result she had no framework for. Multiple vessels. Massive. Descending. Not UNSC. Not machines. Something else entirely. "What are those?" she asked. "The Covenant," he said. And the way he said it, flat, without drama, with the specific weight of someone naming a thing they have been fighting for a decade and have not yet found a way to stop, told her everything she needed to know about how serious the next few hours were going to be. "Are they dangerous?" He looked at her for a moment. Through the opaque visor, she could not see his face, but something in the angle of his helmet, the stillness of him, communicated with complete clarity the answer he gave. "They glass planets," he said. "It's what they do." High above them, the first Covenant assault carrier broke through the cloud cover and entered orbit above a world it had already decided was sacred. Its instruments were singing, its prophets were praying, and none of them, not one, had any idea what was actually buried in the earth below them, or what it was going to do when they tried to claim it. There are moments in history that break everything that came before them. Not battles, not wars, not the rise and fall of civilizations. Those are gradual things, processes that unfold across generations and can be absorbed slowly. The the way a body absorbs poison, in amounts small enough to survive until suddenly they aren't. The moments that truly break history are the ones that arrive in an instant and make everything you thought you knew about the shape of reality restructure itself around a new and irreversible truth. For the crew of the cartographer's wake, that moment came in a hidden facility beneath the earth of a planet they had believed was humanity's greatest loss. It came in the form of an artificial sun. Aloy led them underground. There were 6 of them now: Master Chief, the 4 surviving UNSC soldiers, and Aloy herself moving point through the borderland terrain with the focused efficiency of someone who had made this kind of journey before and understood that the wilderness between here and there did not care about the urgency of what was happening behind you. The machines were still active. The watchers on the ridge were tracking them. She moved the group through the coverage gaps in their patrol patterns with the precision of a woman who had mapped every gap in this part of the borderlands over 3 years of running through it at various speeds under various levels of danger. The chief moved behind her and said nothing. This, she had decided in the 40 minutes since the Thunderjaw fight, was one of his more useful qualities. He did not fill silence with words. He did not ask questions that would be answered by continuing to move. He watched everything. She could feel the sweep of his sensors even when his helmet was facing forward, the comprehensive environmental awareness of a soldier who had learned that the battlefield that kills you is always the one you stop paying attention to. He had not lowered his weapon completely. She had not asked him to. Trust between people who had met over the barrel of each other's weapons less than an hour ago was a resource to be built incrementally, and they were both professional enough to understand that. She took them through a narrow canyon that the machines rarely patrolled. The rock formations disrupted their optical sensors, and down a switchback trail to the facility entrance that most people in the Sundom didn't know existed. The UNSC soldiers followed in the disciplined silence of people who had decided that in an alien environment, the person who knew the terrain was the person whose instructions you followed without debate. Practical. Sensible. She approved. The door was tall neck height. Old world, sealed with mechanisms that her focus had learned to read over years of practice. She placed her hand against the interface panel. The door recognized her. It opened. The facility breathed cold air into the canyon, the exhaled atmosphere of a space that had been sealed and circulating for a very long time, carrying the specific quality of age that Aloy associated with the deepest and oldest parts of the world beneath the world. She led them inside. Gaia's core chamber was not impressive in the way that cauldrons were impressive. Cauldrons impressed through scale and violence, the thundering machinery, the assembly lines producing combat machines in continuous industrial rhythm, the heat and noise, and the overwhelming sense of a system operating at the absolute peak of its designed capacity. Gaia's core was impressive in a different way, quieter, deeper, the way a library is impressive, not through spectacle, but through the sheer accumulated weight of what it contains. The chamber was circular, perhaps 30 meters across, its walls lined with processing architecture that hummed at a frequency just below the threshold of hearing. At the center, suspended in a column of pale blue light that rose from floor to ceiling, was the holographic representation of Gaia herself. Not a face, not a figure, but a presence, a visual manifestation of intelligence so vast and so old that giving it a human shape would have been like giving the ocean a name and expecting the name to be adequate. Gaia spoke before any of them said anything. "Aloy," she said. Her voice was warm and precise, and carried in it the specific quality of an intelligence that had been alone for a very long time, and found the presence of people it recognized to be something close to relief. "You have brought guests." "They fell out of the sky," Aloy said. "Literally." "I am aware." A pause. "I have been monitoring their vessel's energy signature since it entered the atmosphere. Their propulsion technology is unlike anything in my records. Their weapons technology is unlike anything in my records." Another pause. Longer. "Their biology is human. Fully, completely human. But their civilization's development path diverges from everything I know about old world history approximately 800 years ago." Chief had gone very still. "You know about old world history," he said. Not a question. The statement of a soldier identifying the most important piece of information in the room and making sure everyone knew he had identified it. "I am the custodian of it," Gaia said. And then, because she had been holding this information across 900 years of careful, patient, lonely work, and because the people standing in front of her deserved to understand what they had found, she told them everything. It took 40 minutes. Aloy had heard the story before, had lived parts of it, had pieced the rest together from the ruins and archives, and the careful archaeology of a world that had tried to bury its own history. She watched the UNSC soldiers receive it and tried to read their faces. It was not easy. Military training had given most of them the ability to hear terrible things without showing what the hearing cost them. But some things were too large for that discipline to fully contain. The Pharaoh Plague. That was the first rupture. An automated military contractor, a man named Ted Pharaoh, who had built machines to fight wars and had lost control of them, had released a swarm of self-replicating combat units that consumed all biomass and used it as fuel to build more of themselves. No override, no shutdown code, no solution that the old world's full technological capability could implement in time. Within 15 years, the swarm had consumed every living thing on the planet's surface. Every plant, every animal, every person. The biosphere was gone. The atmosphere was failing. Earth was dying. Zero Dawn was the second story. A secret project, the last project, led by a scientist named Elizabeth Sobek, funded by the last gasping resources of a civilization that knew it was dying and chose to spend its final breath on the possibility of a future it would never see. Gaia, a master AI designed to oversee the complete restoration of Earth's biosphere from scratch. Seed vaults, gene banks, automated terraforming systems, the cauldrons, the tall necks, the entire machine ecology that the tribes now lived alongside without understanding what it was or what it had once been for. And Eleuthia, the cradle system that had preserved human genetic material, and eventually, centuries after the plague had burned itself out, begun the process of reseeding human life. The people of the Karja Sundom and the Oseram territories and the Nora sacred lands were not descendants of survivors. They were new, grown from old world genetic archives, given language, given culture, given the building blocks of civilization by automated systems, and then left to find their own way forward. They did not know this. They had never known this. The soldiers absorbed the story in pieces, the way you absorb something too large for a single intake, taking in what you can and filing the rest for processing that would come later, in quieter moments, when the immediate situation had resolved enough to allow for the luxury of genuine grief. It was Lieutenant Osei who asked the question that none of the others had yet asked. She was a navigator. Her mind was trained to fix positions, to understand where things were in relation to each other, to build spatial and temporal maps from available data. "This planet," she said, "this is Earth. This is the Earth in our records, the original." "Yes," Gaia said. "In the old world, the civilization that built you, that was our civilization. Human civilization." "Yes." Osei looked at her hands for a moment, then at the chamber walls, then at Chief, who had not moved. "Earth was never lost," she said. "It was just ahead of us, 1,000 years ahead of us. It died, and it came back, and we never knew." "No," Gaia said quietly. "You never knew." Chief finally moved. He turned to Aloy, and she saw, in the angle of his helmet, something that she recognized, not as an emotion she could name, but as the quality of a person processing a piece of information that was changing the coordinates of everything they had believed about the world they were fighting for. "The underground facilities," he said. "The ones producing the machines. The cauldrons." "Yes," Aloy said. "What happens if someone attempts to access them without authorization?" She looked at him. "Why?" The answer came from Gaia before Aloy could finish the question. "Because something is attempting to do exactly that," Gaia said, "right now, from orbit." The Covenant had not waited. This was the thing about the Covenant that the UNSC had learned. Across a decade of being on the wrong end of their theology, they did not deliberate when they believed they had found something sacred. Deliberation implied doubt. Doubt implied imperfect faith. The prophets had spent 2,000 years building a religious architecture that had no load-bearing room for doubt. And the result was a military force that moved with the terrible velocity of absolute conviction. Prophet Commander Vor Saradum had received the sensor report describing the cauldron energy signatures 14 minutes after the cartographer's wake hit the surface. He had spent 3 of those minutes in prayer, and 11 of them deploying. By the time Aloy was leading the UNSC soldiers through the canyon toward Gaia's facility, the first Covenant dropships were already in the upper atmosphere. By the time Gaia finished telling the story of Zero Dawn, the first Covenant ground forces had touched down in the Karja borderlands. 300 grunts, 60 elite warriors, 2 Wraith tanks, air support from 12 Banshee-class fighters moving in formation over the borderland terrain, their blue-white energy signatures cutting across the afternoon sky like the fingers of something reaching down from orbit to claim what it had decided belonged to it. Vor Saradum had seen Forerunner installation sites before. He had walked the ring of Installation 04. He had stood in the light of Forerunner constructs on 3 different worlds and felt in each case the specific, overwhelming certainty of a being in the presence of the divine. What his instruments were showing him here was different in specific technical ways, but identical in its fundamental essence. Ancient, constructed, operating on principles that the Covenant's own technology could not replicate, producing energy signatures that matched nothing built in the last 100,000 years by any species currently alive. The great journey had led them here. The Forerunners had left something here, something that had been waiting, patient and perfect, for the faithful to arrive and claim it. He transmitted to the fleet, "Begin landing operations. Secure the perimeter. The holy sites must be entered before sunset. The first Covenant patrol reached the borderland wilderness 40 minutes after landing. They met the machines. They were not prepared for the machines. A standard Covenant infantry unit, 12 Ungoi riflemen, supported by 4 Sangheli warriors, moved into the scrubland east of the first landing zone with the ordered confidence of soldiers who had never encountered an enemy capable of surprising them. They moved in tight formation, plasma rifles charged, shields active, scanning the terrain with sensor equipment that had been designed to detect UNSC ambushes and flood incursions and every other hostile force they had encountered across their centuries of warfare. None of their sensor profiles included snap maws. The machine erupted from the river shallows without warning. 4 meters of aquatic combat unit, hydraulic jaw assembly capable of biting through Covenant energy shielding, plasma-based tail weapon charged and tracking before the patrol's point unit had finished processing the threat. The snap maw hit the lead Ungoi at full charge, and the patrol dissolved into chaos inside 3 seconds. The Sangheli recovered fastest. They always did. Their combat reflexes faster than the smaller Ungoi, and their battlefield discipline strong enough to hold even under a sudden assault from a vector they hadn't anticipated. 2 of them engaged the snap maw directly with plasma rifles on full charge. The machine's armor absorbed the first 6 shots and then began to breach on the 7th and 8th. It fell. They killed it. And then the second one came out of the river. And then the third. By the time the patrol's emergency signal reached the landing zone, 7 of its 12 members were down. The 4 Sangheli were still fighting. The surviving Ungoi had made the tactically sound decision to run. Vor Saradum received the report in his command throne. He read it twice. He turned to his tactical officer. "These are not primitive machines," the tactical officer said carefully. "They are combat units, sophisticated, operating in coordinated patterns consistent with tactical programming." He paused. "Prophet Commander, I believe the sacred sites are defended." "Of course they are," Vor Saradum said. "The Forerunners protected their holy places. This is expected. Increase the landing force." He leaned forward in his throne. "We did not cross the void between stars to be stopped by the guardians at the gate." In Gaia's core chamber, a holographic display assembled itself above the central column. A real-time tactical map of the borderlands showing Covenant landing zones, patrol movements, and the converging machine response patterns as the ecology began registering the new incursions. Red icons for Covenant, blue for machines, and between them, spreading across the map as the Covenant pushed deeper into the wilderness, the specific chaotic orange of a battlefield that had not yet decided which way it was going to break. "How many are landing?" Chief asked. Gaia ran the count. "Current ground force estimate, 460 personnel, increasing." She updated the display. 3 additional dropship formations inbound from the orbital fleet. "And if they reach a cauldron entrance?" "The cauldrons have automated defense protocols," Aloy said. "But they weren't designed to stop a military force of this size with this kind of firepower." She studied the map, studied the Covenant movement patterns, the way they were navigating around machine patrols, the specific vectors they were taking toward the terrain features that sat above the underground facilities. "They're heading for Cauldron Iota, the nearest one. They'll reach the outer gate in 3 hours." "What happens if they get inside?" Osei asked. Aloy and Gaia answered simultaneously. Aloy said, they'll try to activate it. Gaia said, if they succeed, even partially, the machine production network will receive a corrupted override signal. The cauldrons will interpret it as a system-wide threat response directive. Every machine currently operating within 500 kilometers will immediately shift to maximum aggression protocols. A pause. All of them. Simultaneously. The tactical map updated again. The orange spread further. How many machines is that? Chief asked. Gaia was quiet for exactly the length of time it took for the number to be something other than terrifying to say. Approximately 40,000 active units, she said, across all classifications, from basic surveillance models to apex combat configurations. The chamber was silent. Chief looked at the map, at the Covenant movement vectors, at the 3-hour window that stood between the current moment and the point at which the situation became unrecoverable. He ran the mathematics of it the way Spartans ran mathematics. Fast, cold, without sentiment, arriving at conclusions and acting on them, rather than mourning the options that the numbers had closed off. We need to get to Cauldron Iota before they do, he said. Yes, Aloy said. Can we hold them off long? Enough? She looked at the map, at the Covenant force size, at the machine coverage between the landing zones and the Cauldron entrance, at the 40,000 active units that were currently neutral and would stop being neutral the moment the Covenant touched the wrong system. We might not be alone, she said. Who else is there? She pulled up a contact signal on her focus, a frequency she had used before and had complicated feelings about, because the person on the other end of it was brilliant and untrustworthy and motivated entirely by his own agenda, which happened on this particular occasion to align precisely with stopping a religious army from accidentally triggering a machine apocalypse. She opened the channel. Silence, she said. I need you to tell me you've been watching the orbital activity. A pause, then a voice, dry, precise, carrying the specific quality of a man who was always several steps ahead of the conversation and was choosing how much of that to reveal. I've been watching it for 6 hours, Silence said. I was wondering how long it would take you to call. Another pause. The aliens are heading for Iota. I know a route that gets you there 90 minutes before they do. But Aloy. His voice shifted, just slightly, in the way it shifted when he had information he found genuinely unsettling. There's something else, something I found in their communications that I've been trying to translate. What? They're not just looking for the cauldrons, he said. They're looking for something beneath them, something their long-range scans detected in the deepest sublevels, something their records are calling. A brief pause, the pause of a man choosing his next word carefully. A sacred archive. Aloy looked at Gaia. Gaia's column pulsed once, a slow, deep oscillation that Aloy had learned to read as the AI equivalent of a sharp intake of breath. That is not possible, Gaia said quietly. That archive is sealed. It has been sealed for 900 years. Nothing should be able to detect it from orbit. Nothing that was built on this Earth, Chief said. The implication settled into the room, like smoke settling into a low space, slowly, completely, until it had filled everything. Whatever the Covenant had detected in the deepest sublevels of Cauldron Iota was not something the machines had built. It was something the old world had hidden there before it died. Something important enough to bury 900 years ago, and important enough for a Covenant fleet to cross into an unknown planet's orbit to find. We need to move, Aloy said. Now. She was already heading for the door. War has a smell. Every soldier who has spent enough time in it learns this eventually. Not as a philosophical observation, but as a practical sensory fact. The smell of plasma discharge and burning metal. The smell of disturbed earth and snapped vegetation from things moving through wilderness at combat speed. The smell of systems pushed past their design limits, of heat sinks failing and coolant vaporizing, and the specific chemical signature of weapons that have been firing continuously long enough to start breaking down their own housings. By the time Aloy's group emerged from the facility canyon and started moving northwest toward Cauldron Iota, the borderland wilds smelled like war. The Covenant had been on the surface for 4 hours. It had not gone the way they planned. Sylens met them 2 kilometers from the facility exit, stepping out of the shadow of a rock formation with the particular timing of a man who had been watching them approach for several minutes and had chosen his moment for maximum effect. He was lean and angular, dressed in the dark, practical clothing of someone who moved through dangerous places professionally and had stopped caring about aesthetics approximately the same time he started caring exclusively about survival. His eyes moved to Chief immediately, cataloged the armor, the weapon, the scale of him, and registered something that was not fear and not awe, but the specific calculating attention of a highly intelligent person encountering a new variable and immediately trying to determine how it could be useful. "The Spartan," he said to Aloy. "Interesting." Later, Aloy said, "What did you find?" Sylens pulled a holographic display from his own modified focus, a stolen piece of technology he had been using for years, more sophisticated than standard, but adapted in ways that spoke of a person who had reverse-engineered things he didn't fully understand and made them work anyway through sheer determined application. The display showed Covenant troop movements, Cauldron approaches, and something else. A data intercept he had pulled from Covenant communications in the past 90 minutes. "Their prophet commander has broken his forces into 3 elements," Sylens said, reading from the display with the speed of someone who had already processed this information and was now presenting his conclusions. First element, 600 troops, 2 Scarab assault platforms, moving on Cauldron Iota from the northeast. Second element, 400 troops pushing through the central wilds, drawing machine attention, acting as a diversion. Third element, he paused, 50 elite warriors, Covenant zealots, moving underground. They found an access shaft 2 kilometers south of Iota's main entrance that bypasses the outer defense grid entirely. "An access shaft," Chief said. "For what?" "For the archive," Sylens said. He looked at Aloy. Gaia was right that it should be undetectable. It was undetectable to anything built in the last 1,000 years. But the Covenant have scanning technology that's older than that, much older, Forerunner derived, and Forerunner technology can read Forerunner construction signatures. He brought up a schematic, the deep sublevels of Cauldron Iota, the sealed chambers at the bottom of the facility. Whatever is in those chambers was built by the same people who built the halos and the Ark and every other sacred site the Covenant has spent 2,000 years worshiping. They don't know that. They can't know that. The civilizational timeline doesn't connect for them. But their instruments know what their instruments know. "The Forerunners built something here," Aloy said slowly. "Not a question. Processing." "No," Sylens said. The old world built something here using Forerunner principles. There's a difference. The Forerunners gave Zero Dawn's architects access to certain fundamental construction methodologies as part of a deep history exchange that neither civilization fully documented. He looked at Gaia's signal on his interface, the connection she maintained through the surface relay nodes. Gaia knows this. She has always known this. It's why the archive is sealed. He looked at Aloy directly. It's also why, if the Covenant accesses it, the consequences will be considerably worse than a machine overload. How much worse? Chief asked. The archive contains the complete operational schematics for the Zero Dawn system, Silence said. Every cauldron, every terraforming subsystem, the full biosphere restoration network. In the right hands or the wrong ones, it is a complete instruction manual for controlling every machine on this planet simultaneously. He paused. Not reprogramming them, not overriding them, controlling them, directing them, deploying them as a weapon against any target, at any scale, indefinitely. The group was silent for a moment. 40,000 machines, Osei said quietly. 40,000 machines, Silence confirmed. Directed by a single command architecture, against any target, anywhere on Earth's surface. Chief looked at the movement display, at the zealot element moving underground, at the timeline that had just compressed dramatically around them. How long before the zealots reach the archive? He asked. At their current pace, 90 minutes. Then the outer force doesn't matter, Chief said. The 600 troops, the scarabs, their noise. The real threat is underground. Yes, Silence said. I'm glad one of you understands the actual problem. The Borderland War was not noise to the people dying in it. Aloy understood this even as she processed Chief's tactical assessment. That the underground element was the critical threat. That the surface engagement was a diversion. She understood it because she could hear the surface engagement from 3 kilometers away, and it sounded nothing like a diversion. It sounded like the end of something. The Covenant's second element had pushed into the central wilds with the disciplined aggression of a force that had fought on 1,000 worlds and developed a comprehensive, battle-tested answer for every threat type it had ever encountered. What it had not encountered, what nothing in the Covenant's military history had prepared it for, was a fully active, ecologically integrated machine swarm responding to a simultaneous multi-point incursion across its entire patrol territory. The machines did not fight like an army. They fought like a planet. They did not charge in formation. They did not advance on a line. They emerged from every direction at once, from the river systems and the rock formations and the high ridges above the Covenant advance, and they hit in the specific coordinated chaos of an ecology that had been designed to protect its territory from every angle simultaneously. Watchers called target data to scrappers. Scrappers drove Covenant infantry into choke points. Long legs hit the choke points from above. And when the Covenant concentrated their forces to deal with the long legs, the trampler herds hit them from behind with the simple, devastating mathematics of several tons of machine moving at full speed. The Covenant Sangheili were extraordinary soldiers. They had earned that reputation across 2,000 years of undefeated warfare. They adapted faster than the Ungoi, recovered faster from chaos, and possessed the individual combat capability to do significant damage even when the tactical situation had completely dissolved around them. They were losing anyway, not quickly, not in the catastrophic collapse of a force that had broken and was running. Slowly, in the grinding, methodical way that a tide loses ground to a beach it has been told to cover. Elite warriors going down one at a time to attacks from angles their shields hadn't been positioned to cover. Wraith tank fire tearing through machine armor, and then the machine continuing forward regardless because the critical systems were behind the armor and the plasma hadn't reached them. Banshee formations flying combat runs and finding that the machines they were targeting had moved by the time the targeting solution resolved, and the terrain they were now firing into was occupied by Covenant infantry. The surface war was 2 hours old, and the Covenant had taken casualties that any human military force would have classified as catastrophic and begun withdrawing from. The Covenant classified them as acceptable in the context of the Great Journey and kept pushing. From his position on a high ridge overlooking the central engagement, a Sangheli field commander named Iris Decom watched his third Wraith tank get pulled into a river by a shell snapper the size of a small building and made a decision that his religious training told him was heresy and his military experience told him was survival. He opened a general broadcast on every frequency his communication equipment could reach. To the human soldiers of the ship that fell from the sky, he said, in the flat, slightly mechanical translation that Covenant communication systems produced when bridging to languages they had encountered recently. I am Field Commander Iris Decom of the Covenant Assault Carrier Word of Devotion. My forces are engaged with the machine defenders of this world and sustaining losses I did not anticipate. He paused. Our Prophet Commander has sent a zealot element underground. I do not know what they seek. I was not told, but I know enough about what our zealots do when they find something sacred to tell you this. Another pause, longer. Whatever is down there, you do not want them to have it, and I do not want them to have it. My reasons are different from yours. The outcome of them having it would be the same for both of us. He paused once more. I am proposing a temporary cessation of hostilities on the surface, so that we might address the greater problem together. Aloy heard the transmission through her focus. She looked at Chief. Chief looked at the movement display, at the zealot timeline, at the mathematics of what they had available to stop 50 elite zealots moving through an underground facility they didn't know. We can't stop them alone, he said. It was not a concession. It was a calculation. I know, Aloy said. Can we trust him? She thought about it for exactly the time it deserved. No, she said. But we can use him. Same thing, right now. Chief responded to Decom's transmission. This is Master Chief Petty Officer Sierra 117, UNSC. Your zealot element is heading for a system that will give them control of every combat machine on this planet's surface. If they activate it, there will be no planet left for either of us to stand on. A pause. We're moving underground to stop them. Your surface forces can cover our approach, or they can keep fighting machines. Your choice. Docum's response came in 11 seconds. We will cover your approach. The access shaft was exactly where Silence said it would be. A vertical drop of 40 meters into the bedrock, leading into a maintenance corridor that ran parallel to Cauldron Iota's main assembly levels before descending to the deep sublevels where the archive sat sealed behind 900 years of deliberately anonymous construction. The Covenant Zealots had gone down at 80 minutes ago. 50 of them. The best soldiers the Covenant fleet carried. Warriors selected for fanaticism, elevated for capability, deployed only for objectives that the prophets considered worth the irreplaceable cost of their lives. Aloy went down first. Chief went second. Silence went third, because someone needed to, and because whatever was in the archive was the most interesting thing he had encountered in 20 years of chasing interesting things. The UNSC soldiers held the surface approach. The deep sublevels of Cauldron Iota were not like the upper facility. The upper facility was machine production, the industrial core of the terraforming ecology, assembly lines and foundries, and the constant, organized motion of a manufacturing system operating at designed capacity. It was loud. It was hot. It was comprehensible, even if the scale was overwhelming, because it was doing something recognizable. Building. Producing. The logic of a factory, even a factory that built creatures rather than components, was a logic that could be followed. The deep sublevels were different, quieter, older. The construction here predated the upper facility, predated it by enough that the architectural language was subtly distinct, the way a building's basement sometimes reveals the older structure it was built on top of. The walls here were smoother, the geometry more precise. The light came from sources embedded directly in the material, rather than mounted in fixtures, and it had a quality that Aloy recognized from the deepest parts of Gaia's core, the specific luminosity of technology that had been operating continuously since before anyone alive had been born. Her focus ran silent down here. Not blank, not the white wall it had returned on Chief's armor. Quiet, as if it recognized that it was in a space that predated its category system entirely and had decided to simply record rather than analyze. "They're ahead," Chief said. His motion sensors had the zealots on the lowest sublevel, a cluster of 50 signatures converging on a single point, moving with purpose, moving with the specific directional urgency of people who had found what they were looking for and were no longer being cautious about reaching it. "How far?" Aloy asked. 400 meters. Moving fast." They ran. They were 150 meters from the archive chamber when the Covenant activated it. Not the archive itself, the outer access panel. The first layer of the system, the interface that connected the deep sublevels to the Cauldron network above. A zealot with Forerunner-derived scanning equipment and 2,000 years of accumulated Covenant technical expertise had found the activation sequence by running it against every known Forerunner access protocol and hitting the right one on the 47th attempt. The facility responded. The light shifted from the quiet, ancient luminosity of the deep sublevels to something brighter, sharper, the specific illumination of a system waking up from dormancy. The walls began to vibrate at a frequency that Aloy felt in her teeth. And from somewhere above them, transmitted down through 40 meters of rock and machinery, came a sound that she recognized with a cold drop of horror that she had experienced before and never gotten used to. The Cauldron production lines were accelerating. "Gaia," she said, opening the comm channel. "What's happening?" Gaia's response was immediate and carried in it something that Aloy had never heard from the AI before. Not panic. Gaia did not panic, but urgency, stripped of every diplomatic softening. The outer interface activation has triggered an emergency response protocol in the Cauldron network, Gaia said. The system is interpreting the unauthorized access as a biosphere threat. The same threat classification it would apply to a second Pharaoh Plague event. It is responding accordingly. A pause. All cauldrons within 800 kilometers are shifting to emergency production capacity. All active machine units within the same radius are receiving a priority mobilization directive. How many machines? Chief asked. Current active units responding to the directive. 62,000 and increasing, Gaia said. Production acceleration will add approximately 3,000 units per hour until the access is closed or the system reaches maximum output. And the machines already deployed? Aloy asked. They are no longer following standard territorial protocols, Gaia said. They are following threat response protocols. Everything on the surface that is not a machine is currently classified as a threat. The implications of this landed in the maintenance corridor like a physical weight. 62,000 machines. Every one of them reclassified. Every Covenant soldier on the surface. Every UNSC trooper. Dacom's warriors who had turned to cover their approach. Everything biological. Everything that breathed. Everything that moved on the surface of the earth above them was now, from the perspective of the most sophisticated terraforming system ever built, a target. The tribes, Aloy said, the Karja settlements, the people in the Sundome. Yes, Gaia said quietly. She was already running. Behind her, she heard Chief, not running yet, because Chief processed before he acted, and what he said, in the 2 seconds before he started moving, told her more about how he operated than anything she had observed in the past 6 hours. Silence, he said. The archive. Can she override it from here? Or does she need to be inside the chamber? Inside, Silence said, already running alongside them. The outer interface activation has locked the remote access. Someone needs to be physically present at the archive core and running the override sequence manually. How long does the override take? If Aloy runs it, 4 minutes. If anyone else tries, considerably longer, assuming they survive the security response. What's the security response? Silence looked at him while running, which was a thing that required practice and confidence in equal measure. The Zealots just found out, he said. From the archive chamber ahead of them, 150 meters of corridor, a left turn, 30 meters more, came the sounds of Forerunner security systems that had been dormant for 9 centuries, deciding that 50 Covenant elite warriors constituted an unauthorized access event and responding with the comprehensive, systematic efficiency of technology built by a civilization that had been very serious about the things it wanted to keep secure. The Zealots were the best soldiers the Covenant had. The security systems were 900 years old and had never stopped working. The sounds from the chamber were not evenly matched. Move, Chief said. They moved. 4 minutes. That was the number Silence had given them. And Silence did not give numbers he hadn't verified, because Silence operated in a world where imprecise information got you killed, and he had survived long enough to develop a deep professional respect for precision. 4 minutes for Aloy to run the override sequence manually at the archive core. 4 minutes while 62,000 machines mobilized above them. 4 minutes while Covenant Zealots and 900-year-old security systems finished their argument in the chamber ahead. 4 minutes while the tribes of the Karja Sundom, people who had no knowledge of what was happening beneath their feet, no understanding of why the machines that had always been dangerous were suddenly everywhere at once and moving with a unified, terrible purpose, tried to survive in a wilderness that had just reclassified them as a threat. 4 minutes was not very long. They covered the last 150 meters of maintenance corridor at a dead run and hit the left turn at full speed and saw the archive chamber entrance 30 meters ahead and what was left of the Covenant Zealot element between them and it. Not much. 14 of the original 50 were still standing. The other 36 were distributed across the corridor and the chamber-antechamber in the specific forensic pattern of people who had encountered a security response they had not anticipated and had not survived the encounter. The 14 survivors were extraordinary soldiers. The fact that they were still alive was a testament to what the Covenant's best warriors were capable of when the alternative was not being alive. They were also fighting a security system that had been designed by the Forerunners to be unkillable by anything the Forerunners themselves could have sent against it, which meant that the 14 Zealots' continued existence was less a victory than a temporary deferral of an outcome the mathematics had already determined. The security system registered Aloy's focus the moment she came around the corner. It stopped, not powered down, not deactivated, stopped, in the specific way that a system stops when it encounters an access credential it recognizes, the way a locked door stops being a barrier when the right key arrives. The defensive turrets retracted. The energy barriers dropped. The automated countermeasures that had been systematically dismantling the Zealot element withdrew into the walls with the quiet, orderly precision of systems returning to standby. The 14 surviving Zealots turned and looked at her. She looked at them. Chief stepped up beside her, weapon raised, covering the geometry of the antechamber in the comprehensive way that a Spartan covered geometry. Completely, without gaps, the targeting solution already built for every Zealot in the room simultaneously. The lead Zealot, identifiable by the specific configuration of his armor markings, the designation of a warrior who had reached the highest rank the Covenant Zealot caste conferred, looked at Aloy for a long moment, then at Chief, then at the open archive chamber entrance behind him, where the security barriers had dropped and the path was clear, and whatever the Covenant had crossed an ocean of stars to find was 30 meters away and undefended. He took one step toward the entrance. Chief fired once. The round hit the deck plating 2 centimeters in front of the Zealot's boot, with a crack that echoed through the antechamber like a statement. "Don't," Chief said. The Zealot stopped. His warriors shifted. The collective tension of 13 elite soldiers reading the situation and calculating simultaneously. Plasma rifles charged. Energy shields activated. The mathematics of the room reorganized itself around a single question. Was the thing in that chamber worth dying for right now, in this corridor, against this opponent? "You don't know what's in there," Aloy said. She kept her voice even. She had talked her way through Karja courts and Eclipse ambushes and conversations with beings that had been running since before she was born. She could talk through this. "You think it's Forerunner. It isn't. It's human. Old human. Older than anything your scanners were calibrated for, which is why they read it as Forerunner. But it's ours." She paused. "And right now it's killing your people. Every soldier you have on the surface is being targeted by 62,000 machines because someone activated the outer interface without authorization. Your Prophet Commander's entire ground force is dying up there." She held the lead Zealot's gaze, the cold gold eyes of a warrior who had spent his entire life in the service of a truth she was about to dismantle. "The only person who can stop it is me, and I need to be in that chamber to do it." The lead Zealot was silent. Behind him, through the chamber entrance, The archive core pulsed with the slow, deep luminosity of a system that had been waiting 9 centuries for the right credentials to arrive. "How do I know?" the zealot said slowly. "That what you do in that room will not be used against us?" "You don't," Aloy said. "Same way I don't know. You won't try to take the archive the moment I restore the system." She looked at him directly. "But your soldiers are dying right now, and mine, and the people in the settlements above us who never asked for any of this." A pause. "That's the only currency that matters in the next 4 minutes. Everything else we can argue about when everyone is still alive to argue." The silence stretched for exactly the length of time it took for a warrior who had spent his life in absolute conviction to find the fault line in that conviction and decide what to do with it. The lead zealot stepped aside. The archive chamber was the most extraordinary space Aloy had ever stood in. She had stood in Cauldron Cores and Gaia's primary facility and the ruins of Project Zero, Dawn's deepest installations. She had stood in places that carried the weight of everything humanity had built and everything it had lost. None of them had prepared her for this. The chamber was circular, perhaps 50 meters across, its ceiling lost in a darkness that the archive's operational lighting did not reach. The walls were not walls in any conventional sense. They were storage, layer upon layer of data architecture running from floor to the invisible ceiling, organized in the precise, hierarchical manner of a system that had been designed not just to hold information, but to hold all information. Everything Zero Dawn had known, everything the old world had built and learned and understood in its final years, compressed into a format that would survive whatever came after. At the center of the chamber, on a raised platform accessed by a short series of steps, was the control interface. It was simple, deliberately simple, designed for a specific user in a specific situation, without the complexity that would slow down someone who had arrived here under pressure and needed to act without hesitation. Aloy recognized the design philosophy immediately because she had encountered it in every Zero Dawn installation she had ever accessed. The old world had built its most critical systems to be operated by people who were frightened and running out of time. They had been right to. She ran up the steps and put her hands on the interface. Her focus connected. The archive recognized her, not her personally, not by name, but by the genetic signature embedded in her biology, the specific cellular encoding that Gaia had explained to her years ago when she first understood what she was. She was the daughter of Elisabeth Sobek, the daughter of the woman who had built all of this, who had looked at a dying world and decided that the most important thing she could do with the time she had left was give a future generation the tools to understand it. The archive did not just recognize Aloy. It had been waiting for her. The interface came fully alive. 4 minutes, Silence had said. She had been in the chamber for 40 seconds. Outside the archive chamber, Master Chief held a corridor. 14 Covenant zealots behind him, technically neutral, definitely watching. Silence beside him, monitoring the situation through his focus with the specific expression of a man who was doing calculations and not sharing the results. The sounds of the surface war filtering down through 40 meters of rock. The machine swarm, now fully mobilized, moving through the borderlands like weather, like a force of nature that had been given a single directive and was executing it with the comprehensive, patient efficiency of systems that did not tire and did not doubt and did not stop. Gaia spoke through the corridor relay. Aloy is running the override sequence. Current completion, 18%. How long? Chief asked. At current rate, 3 minutes, 40 seconds. What's the surface situation? A pause that carried in it the specific quality of an intelligence delivering information it found genuinely distressing. Field Commander Dockham's forces have lost 60% of their ground troops. Your UNSC soldiers are holding the access shaft entrance, but under significant pressure. The machine swarm has reached the outer settlements of the Karja borderlands. Another pause. The tribes are evacuating. They do not understand what is happening. They believe the sun has sent the machines to punish them. Chief processed this. Can you communicate with the tribes directly? Not without Aloy's authorization. The communication systems that reach tribal settlements are locked behind the same access protocols as the rest of the network. Then we hold, Chief said, until she's done. He turned to face the corridor, the direction the surface threat would come from if the access shaft entrance fell, the direction that any Covenant reinforcement from the landing zones would arrive from, the direction that every bad outcome in the current situation would eventually present itself. He set his feet, raised his weapon, and became in the way that Spartans became things when the situation required it. Completely, without reservation, without the self-preservation calculus that governed how normal soldiers positioned themselves in a corridor. The reason nothing was going to come through that entrance for the next 3 minutes and 40 seconds. The lead zealot watched him do this. Watch the Spartan plant himself in the corridor mouth with the absolute settled certainty of a being who had decided that this was the line, and the line was not moving, and who communicated this without words, without posturing, purely through the quality of his stillness and the way the weapon sat in his hands. The lead zealot had fought on 30 worlds. He had faced every enemy the Covenant had ever designated. He had stood against things that should have broken him and had not broken. He had a warrior's ability to recognize, without jealousy and without denial, when he was in the presence of something that operated in the same category as himself, but at a different magnitude. He stepped up beside Chief, not behind him, beside him. The corridor has 2 sides, the zealot said. His name, delivered in the flat translation of the Covenant communication system, was Tel Vordam. He had been killing things in service of a theology he was currently having serious questions about for 40 years. He was very good at it. You cannot cover both. Chief looked at him for a moment. No, he said. I can't. Tel Vordam raised his plasma rifle and covered the right side of the corridor. The remaining 13 zealots, following their commander's lead, with the disciplined automaticity of warriors who understood that in a situation where the doctrine no longer applied, you followed the best soldier available, took positions along the corridor walls. Silens observed this development with the expression of a man updating his threat models in real time. Well, he said quietly, to no one in particular. That's unexpected. 38%, Gaia said. 2 minutes, 50 seconds. The first wave hit the corridor at the 2-minute mark. Not Covenant, machines. 3 Ravagers that had descended the access shaft through the maintenance tunnels, following the heat signatures of biological life forms with the single-minded efficiency of a threat response protocol that didn't distinguish between friend and threat, between zealot and Spartan, between the people trying to fix the problem and the people who had caused it. 62,000 machines on the surface, and the network had sent 3 down here, which said something about the network's target prioritization that was either reassuring or terrifying, depending on how you felt about being on the priority list. Chief took the first one, with 2 rounds to the power cell, and a third that detonated the resulting surge and turned the Ravager into a very efficient barrier across the left side of the corridor. Tel Vordam took the second one apart with plasma fire at close range, moving with the combat efficiency of someone who had spent 40 years eliminating anything in his path and had simply updated the target category. The third one made it to the corridor mouth before the zealots behind Tel Vordam brought it down in a coordinated barrage that Silence later described as impressively synchronized for people who had been enemies 12 minutes ago. 59%, Gaia said. 2 minutes, 10 seconds. The second wave was larger. 7 stalkers. Machine predators built for ambush, capable of cloaking, fast enough to close the distance from the access shaft to the corridor mouth in under 6 seconds. They came down the shaft in sequence and deployed their stealth systems the moment they hit the maintenance tunnel, disappearing from visual range, their heat signatures dropping to near undetectable. Chief's motion sensors found them anyway. 7 contacts, he said, cloaked, 20 meters and closing. Tel Vordam's hand moved to a device on his forearm, a Forerunner-derived scanning tool, the same technology that had detected the archive in the first place. I can see them, he said. Paint them, Chief said. Tel Vordam highlighted the stalker positions on a shared tactical frequency that his armor broadcast and that Chief's sensors picked up and integrated in approximately 0.4 seconds. 7 positions, 7 targeting solutions. Chief fired 6 times in 4 seconds, working left to right across the painted positions with the mechanical precision of a targeting system that had been refined across a decade of combat against enemies considerably harder to kill than stalkers. 6 stalkers dropped. The 7th made it to 5 meters before Tel Vordam took it apart personally. 78%, Gaia said. 1 minute, 40 seconds. The surface was burning. Not the fire of the crash. That was old by now. The cartographer's Wake's funeral pyre, reduced to smoldering wreckage in the impact trench. This was the fire of a machine swarm moving through the borderland wilds at maximum mobilization. The heat signatures of 62,000 active units. The plasma discharge of Covenant weapons that were still firing despite the losses. The specific illumination of a battlefield that had stopped being organized and become something older and more elemental. Chaos. Pure, thorough, absolute chaos across 20 kilometers of terrain. Dacom held what was left of his surface force on a ridge above the Covenant landing zone and watched the mathematics of his defeat with the specific cold attention of a commander who understood that the battle was already decided and was now only concerned with the cost of the decision. He had 312 soldiers left. He had arrived with more than 1,000. The machines had not stopped. The machines would not stop. Not because they were relentless in the way that Flood was relentless, mindless, infinite, consuming, but because they were purposeful in the way that a well-designed weapon is purposeful. They knew where everything was. They coordinated without communication delays. They did not overextend or underestimate or make the tactical errors that biological commanders made when they were tired or afraid or operating on incomplete information. They were not tired. They were not afraid. They had perfect information. His communication channel opened. The human AI, Gaia, a name that meant nothing to him and carried no sacred weight, a name that was simply a designation for the intelligence that had built all of this, spoke to him directly. Field Commander Dakam, Gaia said, I am going to ask you to do something that will require you to trust a system you have no reason to trust. I am listening, Dakam said. In approximately 90 seconds, the machine network will receive an override command that will restore standard behavioral protocols. The mobilization will end. The machines will stand down. A pause. When that happens, your soldiers will have a window of approximately 40 minutes to reach your dropships and return to your fleet before the standard patrol patterns resume. Another pause. Longer. I am telling you this because you made a choice in that corridor that cost you nothing tactically and demonstrated something I had not expected from your civilization. Her voice carried in it the quality of a very old intelligence that had learned to be precise about what it valued. I do not offer this to your prophet commander. I offer it to you. Dakam was quiet for a moment. On the ridge below him, a trampler walked through the remains of his third landing zone with the unhurried thoroughness of a machine completing a task. What did my soldiers in the corridor do? He asked. They stood beside a human soldier, Gaia said simply, to hold a line, for reasons that had nothing to do with the great journey. Dakam looked at the battlefield, at the cost of what the great journey had purchased here, in lives, in ships, in the specific irreversible currency of warriors who would not be coming home. He thought about the zealots underground who had activated something they didn't understand because their faith told them that sacred things were meant to be activated. He thought about Tel Vordam, who'd been sent here to die for a theology and had instead chosen to fight for a corridor. 90 seconds, he said. Yes, Gaia said. 91%, Gaia said. 40 seconds. The corridor was clear. The third wave had not come. Either the network had deprioritized the underground threat as the surface mobilization consumed its routing capacity, or something in the system's logic had registered the archive's override sequence in progress and was waiting to see how it resolved before committing more resources. Chief didn't know which. It didn't matter. Clear was clear. He turned and walked to the archive chamber entrance and looked inside. Aloy was at the interface, both hands flat against the surface, her focus running at a brightness he hadn't seen from it before. Not the quiet geometric overlay of its normal operation, but a full active interface, every processing function engaged, the light of it casting her face in pale blue. She was breathing with the controlled deliberateness of someone doing something that required everything they had, and had decided that the only thing between her and completion was the time it took to finish. 20 seconds, Gaia said. Silence stood at the chamber's edge. He had been watching the override sequence run, with the expression of a man watching someone do something he could not do himself, and was deciding how he felt about that. He looked at Chief. Whatever you think of her, Silence said quietly, understand that there is no one else on this planet who could do what she is doing right now. Chief looked at Aloy, at the focus, at the 900 years of dead civilization compressed into the system she was currently wrestling back from the edge of catastrophe. At the woman who had been raised alone, who had learned the truth of her world piece by piece through danger and loss, and the specific stubborn refusal to accept that any door was too heavy to open. I know, he said. 10 seconds, Gaia said. The archive core pulsed. Once, twice, 3 times, each pulse deeper and more resonant than the last, the rhythm of a system completing a process it had been designed to complete, arriving at the end of a sequence that its creators had written 900 years ago and trusted to the right hands to execute when the time came. Aloy pulled her hands from the interface. The light changed. The deep, urgent luminosity of a system in emergency response. The hard, bright mobilization light that had been burning since the outer interface activation softened, shifted, returned to the quiet, ancient warmth of a facility that was no longer in crisis. The vibration in the walls eased. The corridor behind them went still. And through 40 meters of rock and earth and maintenance tunnel, the signal went out. Not as a sound, not as anything biological, but as a command pulse that traveled through the machine communication network at the speed of light and arrived simultaneously in the processing cores of 62,000 active units spread across 800 kilometers of terrain. Stand down. Threat response terminated. Return to standard behavioral protocols. The machines stopped. Not all at once. The network processed the command in order of proximity to the transmission source, so the machines closest to Cauldron Iota stood down first, and the effect rippled outward like a stone dropped in still, water, a spreading circle of stillness moving across the borderlands at the speed of signal propagation. Tramplers mid-charge lowered their heads and turned away. Stalkers decloaked and resumed patrol patterns. Thunderjaws retracted their disc launchers and walked back toward their territory markers with the unhurried calm of animals that had never been anything other than what they were. On the ridge above the Covenant landing zone, Dockham watched the machine swarm withdraw and said nothing for a long moment. Then he opened his command channel and gave his remaining soldiers the order to move. The access shaft brought them back to the surface into a borderland that was quieter than it had been in 6 hours. Not silent. The aftermath of a battlefield is never silent. The wreckage too present. The evidence of what had happened too fresh and too specific for the ordinary sounds of the wilderness to fill in the gaps. But quieter. The specific quality of quiet that follows the end of something enormous. The held breath of a world that has been through something and is not yet sure what it means. The UNSC soldiers at the shaft entrance had held. All 4 of them. Lieutenant Osei had a plasma burn across her left forearm that she was treating with the focused, slightly distracted attention of a soldier who had decided that the wound was manageable and that managing it was something to do while more important things were being processed. She looked at Aloy when she came up out of the shaft and said nothing. Then she looked at Tel Vordam, emerging behind Silence, and said nothing about that either, because some developments in a situation are so far outside the available frameworks that the only honest response is to acknowledge them by looking directly at them and reserving judgment. Chief came up last. He stood at the shaft entrance and looked across the borderlands. At the retreating machine swarms, the Covenant dropships lifting from the landing zones with what remained of their ground forces, the smoke still rising from a dozen points across the terrain where the battle had been most intense. At the distant rooftops of the Karja settlements visible above the tree line, intact, the evacuation that had begun 2 hours ago reversing itself as the people who had run from the machines realized the machines were no longer coming. Aloy stood beside him and looked at the same landscape. "Will they come back?" she asked. "The Covenant." Chief was quiet for a moment. Some of them will, he said. The Prophet Commander won't accept what happened here as a final answer, but Dockham will file a report when he returns to the fleet about what the cauldrons actually are, about what this planet actually is. And there are people in the Covenant hierarchy, not many, but some, who will read that report and ask questions that the prophets won't be able to answer. He paused. It won't stop them forever, but it will slow them down. And your galaxy, she asked. What do you tell them about this place? He considered the question with the full weight it deserved, because it was not a small question. It was the question that everything else was downstream of. What the UNSC did with the knowledge that Earth existed, that it had survived, that humanity had a second history running parallel to the one they had been fighting to preserve. Whether they came here with fleets and politics and the full complicated machinery of a civilization at war. Whether they tried to fold this world into their conflict and give the Covenant another target to find. Or whether they chose something harder, something rarer, something that required them to look at a world that had rebuilt itself without them and recognize that maybe the most important thing they could do was make sure it got the chance to keep doing that. I tell them what I found, Chief said. I leave out the coordinates. She looked at him. For now, he said, until the war is over. Until there's something left of us worth introducing to them. Aloy held his gaze, or held the visor, which had become the same thing, for a long moment. Then she nodded once. The nod of a person who had spent years protecting something that the wider world would have destroyed if it had known where to find it, and who recognized in his answer the same quality of decision. Thank you, she said. He said nothing. Spartans did not typically respond to gratitude with language, and she had started to understand that his silences were not absences. They were answers. Tel Vordam found Chief before the dropship came. He stood in front of the Spartan in the late afternoon light of the borderlands, his armor damaged, his warriors diminished, the specific bearing of a soldier who had arrived somewhere he had not expected to arrive and was taking a moment to understand where that was before he moved again. The prophets told us, Tel Vordam said, that the great journey led to transcendence, to elevation, to becoming something beyond what we are. He looked at the borderlands, the machines returning to their patterns, the earth recovering, the world quietly reasserting the rhythms that the last 6 hours had disrupted. I have stood in the ruins of what the humans of this world built, he said. I have read the archive's outer records, the ones the security system did not destroy before we reached them. I know what they sacrificed, what they made. A pause. That was not the work of a lesser species. Chief said nothing. The great journey was a lie, Tel Vordam said, not with grief. With the specific, clean clarity of a soldier who had identified a tactical error and was correcting his position. I do not yet know what the truth is, but I know that. He looked at Chief directly. What do you fight for? The question sat between them. Chief looked at the settlement rooftops above the tree line, at the people returning to their homes, at a world that had died and come back, at a woman with a handmade bow who had held a machine network together by being the only person alive that it recognized as belonging to it. Them, he said, simply, without qualification. Tel Vordam was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said, I think that is the answer. He walked back to his warriors. The UNSC dropship came at dusk, a shuttle from a rescue team that had followed the cartographer's wake's distress signal through the slipspace anomaly and arrived in orbit 4 hours after the battle ended to find a fleet of Covenant carriers in slow retreat and a planet below them that their cartographic systems classified after 17 verification runs as Earth. Aloy watched the shuttle descend through the evening sky. This one controlled, this one deliberate, this one leaving a clean line across the dusk rather than the burning scar of 6 hours ago. And felt, in the space where the day's events were still settling, the particular quality of a moment that is not an ending, but a change in the shape of things. Chief walked to the shuttle. At the ramp, he stopped, turned. She was still watching from the ridge where they had first looked out at the retreating machines together. "You'll have more coming," she said. "People who want to understand this place, who want to help." "Yes," he said. "Tell them to ask first." He looked at her for a moment. Then he did something she had not seen him do before, had not expected to see from behind an opaque visor, from inside 2 meters of Mjolnir armor, from the man who communicated in compressed sentences and held everything else in the silence between them. He nodded, not the nod of compliance, not the nod of a soldier receiving an order, the nod of a person recognizing another person, across every difference of galaxy and era and the specific catastrophic circumstances that had introduced them, as someone who understood what they were protecting and why the protection mattered. He went up the ramp. The shuttle lifted. Aloy watched it climb until it was a point of light among the stars, until it was indistinguishable from the 1,000 other points of light that the evening sky was revealing one by one as the dusk deepened. She stood on the ridge in the quiet after everything and let the borderland sounds fill in around her, the distant calls of machines returning to their territories, the wind through the long grass, the ordinary, extraordinary sounds of a world that had survived another day of being itself. Somewhere above the atmosphere, a Covenant fleet was making calculations about what had just happened and what it meant for the great journey. Somewhere in the UNSC's operational database, a survey mission classified as lost had just been reclassified as something that had no existing category and would require a new one. Somewhere in the deep sublevels of Cauldron Iota, the archive waited, sealed again, patient again, holding the complete history of everything humanity had been, and everything it had sacrificed for the possibility of everything it could become. And somewhere in the borderlands below the ridge, a machine patrol moved through its territory in the last light of the day, following the patterns it had been given, maintaining the world it had been built to maintain, not sacred, not heretical, not a weapon or a wonder or a theological argument, just a machine doing its work on a planet that was still, against every reasonable expectation, alive. For now, that was enough. For now, that was everything. If you want to see more crossover stories like this, legendary universes colliding in ways nobody saw coming, hit that subscribe button and drop in the comments the name of any universe or character you want to see collide next. The best suggestions become the next episode. May the Force be with you. More stories await.